The Subcommittee on Workforce Protections will come to order. I note that a quorum is present. Without objection, the chair is authorized to call recess at any time. Since the evil, horrifying October 7th attack by Hamas terrorists on Israeli men, women, and children, America has witnessed a deeply disturbing rise in anti-Semitism. Following the attacks, the Anti-Defamation League reported a 388% increase in anti-Semitic incidents. This has continued in the weeks and months since, across different regions of the country and different facets of society, as the heinous events outside a Los Angeles synagogue this last week made painfully clear. Yet it is in one particular setting, at colleges and universities, where the problem has been most troubling. We have seen institutions of higher learning gripped by one of the world's most ancient and retrograde prejudices. We have seen scenes that shock the conscience. We have heard from students who have lived through an absolute nightmare, who've been targeted, attacked, denied access to campus or buildings, all because of their heritage. We have seen university leaders stand by as this horror played out on their campuses, even in some cases catering to those who promote anti-Semitism and celebrate terrorism. In response, the House Education and the Workforce Committee, under the leadership of Chairwoman Fox, has worked to expose and combat this disgraceful reality. We are using every available tool to protect the safety and civil rights of students, to compel our universities to take immediate action and to undertake systematic reform. Today, the Subcommittee on Workforce Protections will examine another dimension of this crisis: employment-based discrimination in higher education. We will hear about the experience of Jewish faculty and staff at universities that have allowed illegal harassment and discrimination to go unchecked. Universities are often a state's largest employer. In my home state, the University of California system has nearly 200,000 employees, making it the single largest state-based employer in the United States. I take great pride in the University of California system and its world-class schools. While many services in our government are substandard, and while our universities have had their challenges, the UC, CSU, and community college systems have remained tremendous assets to our state. However, the events that we have witnessed on certain campuses in California and across the United States could not be more antithetical to the values of our state and our country. The University of California, Los Angeles, UCLA, is a particularly troubling case. 3 students have now filed a lawsuit against UCLA for violating their rights by allowing the, quote, Jew exclusion zone encampment and related anti-Semitic harassment. Chancellor Jean Block testified before this committee last month regarding the encampment, which was eventually broken up, but the university showed an inability to take decisive action and protect the rights of Jewish students and employees. The chancellor at our hearing refused to even answer questions about whether students had been suspended or faculty disciplined. On May 6th, at the University of California, San Diego, an illegal encampment eventually led to the arrest of 64 individuals, including 40 students. Professor Brian Keating will testify today about how this encampment was anything but peaceful and how it aimed to foment hate against the Jewish people. He will share testimonials from other university employees, one who said she doesn't know, quote, how much longer I can do this. I can't work at UCSD. I can barely live here, and I have learned brutally and painfully where my life ranks for the people I'm surrounded by every day. At Mount San Antonio College in Walnut, California, geography professor Dafna Golden endured vile harassment from a fellow professor and students, including being called a, quote, violent Zionist and being called a former soldier in the Israeli Defense Forces, even though this wasn't even true. She will testify today to her experience as a professor under such hostile conditions. I applaud Professor Golden for coming forward with her story, and I look forward to the testimony of all of our esteemed witnesses. Universities' inadequate responses to this harassment only underscore the urgent need for stronger protections and accountability, and your insight today on how we can achieve this goal will be invaluable. Specifically, Title VII of the Civil Rights Act protects employees from anti-Semitic discrimination. Therefore, an important purpose of today's hearing is to examine the extent to which universities are failing to fulfill their legal obligations to faculty and staff and what corrective measures may be needed to uphold the law. College may be out for the summer for the most part, but the rise of anti-Semitism remains a grave risk to students, faculty, and American higher education. It is simply put an alarming state of affairs. It cannot be tolerated. One way we can assure the rights of Jewish Americans are protected is by upholding Title VII and remaining resolute in our commitment to fighting anti-Semitism and all forms of discrimination. With that, I yield to the ranking member for an opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to first of all express my gratitude to the witnesses for testifying before the subcommittee today. Welcome. Today we're here to address crucial issues affecting our educational institutions and workplaces. It is my hope that we can come together to confront these challenges with a commitment to inclusive and effective solutions. It's imperative to recognize that everyone deserves to work in a place free from discrimination. The Department of Education's Office for Civil Rights and the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, EEOC, have processes in place to respond to employment discrimination complaints. However, more work needs to be done to improve interagency coordination. The recent Government Accountability Office, GAO, the findings underscore the need for enhanced coordination and resource allocation to better serve those facing discrimination. Effective oversight of agencies responding to discrimination claims requires understanding the law that prohibit discrimination. Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 prohibits discrimination by recipients of federal funds, and Title VII prohibits discrimination in the workplace. Our discussions must be informed by an understanding of both the law and the facts so that we can take meaningful steps to ensure agencies such as EEOC and EDOCR can provide appropriate redress to individuals facing discrimination. And so at the heart of today's discussion is the intersection of discrimination, including anti-Semitism, and the capacity of our federal agencies' response mechanisms. The Biden administration's national strategy for combating anti-Semitism provides a roadmap for the federal agencies and our nation to comprehensively address these issues. Additionally, the recently updated guidance on workplace harassment issued by the EEOC provides clear guidance for employers regarding their responsibility to maintain safe, supportive work environments, including for their workers who are part of the LGBTQ+ community. Unfortunately, the majority's focus on anti-Semitism while simultaneously attempting to hamstring federal civil rights enforcement is both counterintuitive and counterproductive. Furthermore, this approach risks undermining the progress that we have already made. Instead, it is my wish that today's hearing will provide us with an opportunity for bipartisan collaboration on policy solutions that safeguard the civil rights and dignity of all individuals. By fully funding our enforcement agencies, addressing faculty diversity, enhancing agency responsiveness, and ensuring equitable treatment for all, we can truly foster inclusive environments that promote student success and workplace fairness. And with that, I look forward to productive discussions today and look forward to your testimony. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Pursuant to Committee Rule 8C, all committee members who wish to insert written statements into the record may do so by submitting them to the committee clerk electronically in Microsoft Word format by 5 p.m. after 14 days from the date of this hearing, which is July 10th, 2024. And without objection, the hearing record will remain open for 14 days after the date of this hearing to allow such statements and other extraneous material referenced during the hearing to be submitted for the official hearing record. I note for the subcommittee that some of my colleagues who are not permanent members of this subcommittee may be waving on for the purpose of today's hearing. I will now turn to the introduction of our distinguished witnesses. Our first witness today is Mr. Mark Rienzi, who is the president and CEO of the Becket Fund for Religious Liberty, located in Washington, D.C. Our second witness is Professor Brian Keating, who is the Chancellor's Distinguished Professor of Physics at the University of California, San Diego, which is located in La Jolla, California. Our third witness is Ms. Melissa Emrey-Arras, who is a director in the U.S. Government Accountability Office's Education, Workforce, and Income Security team in Washington, D.C. And our final witness is Professor Dafna Golden, who is a geography professor at Mount San Antonio College in Walnut, California. We thank the witnesses for being here today and look forward to your testimony. Pursuant to committee rules, I would ask that you each limit your oral presentation to a 5-minute summary of your written statement. I would also like to remind the witnesses to be aware of their responsibility to provide accurate information to the subcommittee. I will first recognize Mr. Rienzi.
Thank you, Chairman Kiley, Ranking Member Adams, distinguished members of the subcommittee. I'm honored to appear before you today to offer testimony as part of your important efforts to combat anti-Semitism in higher education. Imagine, if you will, the following scenes. A group of individuals holds a demonstration at a main thoroughfare in a public university. They carry anti-Semitic signs and they chant, "Slaughter the Jews." Police officers are present, but they stand idly by as demonstrators intimidate Jewish faculty and Jewish students. A few weeks later, a professor finds a pile of trash at her front door with a piece of paper that says "Loudmouth Jew" and a book cover that prominently features a swastika. Then imagine hundreds of agitators swarming a law school, holding signs and chanting slogans like "There's only one solution" and "Death to Jews." A short time later, unknown individuals put up a statue on campus that traffics in anti-Semitic tropes, with a large pig holding a bag of money alongside a bucket painted with the Star of David. Finally, students and outside activists erect an unauthorized encampment at the heart of campus, outside of important academic buildings and the main undergraduate campus library. Those inside the encampment shout anti-Semitic slurs like "This is the final solution" and "Death to Jews." They draw a Star of David, and then they cross it out. And then they draw the Nazi hate symbol, the swastika. They set up checkpoints to block access. They interrogate students attempting to pass. They issue wristbands to people with approved ideas and views. They deny entry to visibly Jewish students, such as those wearing a Star of David or wearing a kippah. Police officers are present and aware of the situation, but university officials instruct them not to intervene. The university hires outside security staff not to help the Jewish students through the center of campus, but to send them elsewhere unless they can get the approval of the mob chanting "Death to Jews." University officials fail to discipline students engaged in the unlawful conduct and refuse to enforce campus policies against the illegal encampment. Their actions embolden the protesters. Violence predictably ensues. Now, those episodes may sound like they come from Germany in the 1930s, but they don't. They describe real-life events that occurred and have continued to occur at the University of California, Los Angeles over the past 9 months. And they could very well describe events at any number of American universities where similar illegal conduct has happened following Hamas's terrorist attack on October 7th. So what can the federal government and what can federal law do? I'll give you just a brief overview. The federal government can enforce Title VI, as can private litigants. Title VI prohibits keeping people out of participation in federal programs, which encompass virtually all universities, on the basis of race or ethnic heritage. And the Supreme Court has already found that discrimination against Jews qualifies as racial and ethnic discrimination. As Chairman Kiley said, the federal government and private litigants can enforce Title VII, which makes it illegal to discriminate on the basis of religion or race or national origin, and also makes it illegal to discriminate in the terms and conditions of employment for those employees, including creating what surely is going on at many of these universities, which is a very, very hostile work environment. There are other laws too, such as the Ku Klux Klan Act, which was enacted 150 years ago to stop masked Klans members from depriving people of their civil rights. That law also makes it illegal for people who have the ability to stop the conspiracy, like these universities, from failing to do so. And lastly, where these universities are public institutions, they are, of course, also obliged to abide by the Constitution, and that means providing the equal protection of the laws. In many situations, this is a clear failure to provide Jewish students and faculty with equal protection, and protecting the right to freely exercise religion, which unfortunately is the basis on which many people have been excluded. I thank the committee for its time and welcome the questions.
Thank you very much. I now recognize Professor Keating.
Chairman Kiley and esteemed members of the committee. My name is Brian Keating, and I stand before you today as a Jew and an astrophysicist. My childhood dream was to study the universe and all of its wonders. This dream led me to the University of California, where our motto is taken from the Hebrew Bible, "Let there be light." I was dedicated to the pursuit of the luminous thrill of scholarship. And I always wondered who would pay me to do this job. In fact, I do it for free, but please don't tell Gavin Newsom or the regents. My concern is not for me. I'm fully tenured and working on well-funded research with a brilliant team of scientists around the world. No, today I speak for scholars, like a young, untenured professor from Israel, her homeland demonized since October 7th and even long before. I speak for an undergraduate teaching assistant who studies and whose employment requires him to navigate the complex thoroughfare of campus that sometimes includes encampments, which are no-go zones for him. All educators are familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs. It provides a framework for creating an educational environment conducive to learning. At the base of the pyramid is safety, physical safety and emotional safety. And safety means more than just meeting your needs, your basic needs. It also has to involve an environment free of discrimination, harassment, and intimidation. As an educator, I know you cannot learn in a place of hatred. You cannot teach from a place of hatred. However, for decades, UC has not been a safe space for Jewish and Israeli students, staff, and employees. Faculty members call them, their colleagues, effing colonizers. During a tour of a lab and workspace environment where Israelis and Jews are working and pursuing their studies, they are confronted by calls for the elimination of the one Jewish homeland. These faculty call themselves scholars and yet engage in a dishonest and anti-intellectual boycott of the one Jewish state, forbidding members to come to our campus to learn, work, and study based on their religion and national origin. An Israeli undergraduate student, dedicated pre-med who wants to save lives, faces very challenging classes, but also he is ostracized from the very union that's meant to protect him, the United Auto Workers Union, who seems more interested in demonizing his homeland and calling for strikes against the campus. When he attempts to have his voice heard at an academic senate meeting, he sees the ISIS flag waved proudly outside by protesters. A young woman pursuing her doctoral degree receives a letter from her professor, her employer, filled with hateful anti-Israel rhetoric. This letter intimidates her and makes her question her safety within her department. When she seeks refuge over a coffee at the campus student union, she's blocked by an illegal encampment, which is a no-go zone for her as a Jew. Following one of the daily five daily prayer services in the camp, she's confronted by chants for the elimination of Israel as a sovereign Jewish state. She hears calls for intifada, reminding her of the awful times decades ago which she thought were over. These flyers also include calls for death to America. A professor tries to bypass the encampment. He hears the familiar chants, long condoned on our campus. There is only one solution, intifada revolution, which is a veiled reference to the Holocaust. Protesters at the encampment scream at him, "May Allah humiliate and crush all the Zionists. Enter them in fire." A graduate student employee sees students passing out pamphlets with the Star of David compared to the Nazi swastika, and she decides the life of the mind may not be for her, and we would be all the more poorer for it. In an environment where academic freedom should flourish, professors try to hire scholars from Middle Eastern studies and find them banned because of their national origin. Let me quickly relate a story of the reprehensible, anti-black, racist Compton cookout which took place on our campus in 2010. There were immediate steps in remediation, many of them sponsored by the Black Student Union. However, in May 2023, over a year ago, a swastika made of human feces was found in a dorm and learning facility on our campus. No such activity to combat anti-Semitism has taken place in our campus. When swords were found and flammable materials were found at an illegal encampment, nothing of the sort is tolerable. Our encampment only lasted 5 days, thanks to the quick action of our Chancellor, Pradeep Khosla. Other campuses weren't so lucky, and there was tremendous violence at our sister campus, as you heard, at University of California, LA. I have very many recommendations in my written testimony, but I think the most important one is to develop a comprehensive conversation between Students for Justice in Palestine, which unfortunately explicitly forbids conversation with Zionists. I hope that we can return our campus, with your leadership help, back to being a beacon of light. Let there be light.
Thank you very much. I now recognize Ms. Emrey-Arras.
Chairman Kiley, Ranking Member Adams, Chairwoman Fox, Ranking Member Scott, and members of the subcommittee. Thank you for the opportunity to be here today to discuss GAO's work on employment discrimination at colleges and universities. Our findings focus on the government's process for handling employment discrimination complaints, including those related to religious discrimination. My statement today will address the roles of Education's Office for Civil Rights and the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, and how they process complaints of employment discrimination. I will also highlight 2 recommendations from our March report that would help ensure timely and complete processing of all higher education employment discrimination complaints. Several federal statutes protect faculty and other employees of colleges and universities from employment discrimination. I would like to specifically highlight, as others have already, that Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of '64 prohibits employment discrimination based on race, color, sex, national origin, or religion. Both EEOC and Education receive individual complaints of employment discrimination in higher education. EEOC promotes equal opportunity in the workplace and is the primary federal agency responsible for enforcing employment discrimination statutes. Once EEOC receives complaints, the complaints are assigned to its investigative staff. EEOC also files litigation in select cases against employers. OCR's mission is to promote educational excellence through vigorous enforcement of civil rights. OCR assigns complaints it receives to its investigative staff. If OCR investigative staff determine that Education does not have jurisdiction over an employment case, they will often refer it to EEOC. In our work, we found that OCR and EEOC handled about 20,000 employment discrimination complaints in higher education from 2011 to 2021. However, we identified concerns with both the tracking and the timing of referrals from OCR to EEOC. OCR refers the majority of employment discrimination complaints it receives to EEOC. EEOC processed close to 19,000 higher education employment discrimination complaints from 2011 to 2021. And I'd like to point out that during this time period, there were over 1,000 charges related to religious discrimination involving faculty and staff at colleges and universities. Although OCR refers the majority of the employment discrimination complaints it receives to EEOC, given EEOC's jurisdiction, OCR's referrals were usually past the 30-day referral deadline set out in its own agency policy. We found that in 22, OCR referred 72 of 99 such complaints after the 30-day deadline. The percentage of late OCR referrals increased from 40% being late in 2011 to 73% being late in 22. In 22, we found that OCR took an average of 71 days to refer complaints to EEOC. OCR and EEOC officials have acknowledged that late referrals could delay complaint investigations and negatively affect individuals. We recommended that Education track the number of days it takes to refer complaints to EEOC and use that information to develop a plan to reduce delays. Education agreed. Turning to EEOC, we found that EEOC could not confirm that it had received 100% of OCR's referrals. We recommended that EEOC develop and finalize a protocol to ensure it receives and processes all complaint referrals from education. EEOC noted it is taking related action. Until education and EEOC implement our recommendations, some faculty and staff who have experienced discrimination may continue to experience delays in getting relief from the government. Thank you. This completes my statement.
Thank you. I now recognize Professor Golden.
I am here today to share the distressing experiences I have endured at Mount San Antonio College, also known as Mount SAC, as a Jewish professor in the wake of the October 7th terrorist attacks in Israel. I have experienced an anti-Semitic hostile environment at Mount SAC and anti-Semitic discrimination specifically directed at me, which Mount SAC, my employer, has failed to properly remedy or protect me from. The discrimination began when I expressed concerns to the administration regarding a professor's planned screening of an offensive and anti-Semitic film, The Occupation of the American Mind. The film's central thesis is that leaders of major Jewish organizations use their power to control Americans into supporting Israel, and is basically a screen version of the Protocols of the Elders of Zion. The film serves no academic purpose. It is propaganda, pure and simple, better suited for a class as an example of hate speech or anti-Semitism. In response to my objections, and to their credit, the Equity Center withdrew its support for the film. Nonetheless, the professor continues to show this film in his unrelated American history classes. In retaliation for voicing my objections to the film, the professor instigated a campaign of harassment against me by email and by making statements to their classes, falsely labeling me a violent Zionist and former soldier in the IDF, both of which are false, and inciting his students to stand up to me. A Jewish student in the professor's Mexican-American history class documented these actions, including a disturbing incident where the professor mimicked a Nazi salute. Individuals associated with a notorious anti-Semitic organization on campus vandalized the bulletin board outside my office by removing my Israeli flag and pro-Israel articles and replacing them with anti-Israel propaganda, including a flyer with demands to renounce the pro-Zionist, remove the pro-Zionist library display, and declare support for Palestine. As a geography professor, I had installed a perfectly normal, non-ideological academic display at the school library about Israel's changing borders. The library reported that due to student complaints and division in the community, they removed the display. My profile on ratemyprofessor.com was bombarded with fake negative reviews. Students making public comments to the Board of Trustees demanded that I be fired and declared a boycott of my classes. My spring semester on-campus class was then canceled due to low enrollment, limiting me to online teaching. My lack of on-campus presence has deteriorated crucial collaborative relationships. My attempts to engage with key faculty and administration have been ignored, leaving the pervasive anti-Semitism on campus unaddressed. Like so many of my Jewish colleagues at colleges across the country, the general anti-Semitic hostile environment turned to focus on me directly because I am a Jew, because I won't hide or reject my connection as a Jew to the Jewish state and the Jewish people. I reported these incidents to the deans and to the Human Resources Office. HR found the complaint to be unsubstantiated, in part because the student who documented the professor's actions did not want to submit a statement out of fear of retaliation and harassment, and therefore the HR office took no disciplinary actions. The professor continues leading protests with students, demanding reinstatement of the screening of the anti-Semitic film, and the professor continues to show the film in their classes. This hostile environment has significantly impacted my professional duties and relationships. As a result of the toxic atmosphere and severe impact on my mental health and my professional standing, and the refusal of my employer to protect me in my workplace, I have decided to transition out of academia as soon as possible. I urge this body to take immediate and decisive actions to address this rampant anti-Semitism and restore a safe, respectful, and inclusive environment for faculty and staff on college campuses, no less than what is expected in any workplace. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Under Committee Rule 9, we will now question witnesses under the 5-minute rule. They have just called votes, so we're going to do one round of questions, and then we'll have a brief recess for votes. I now recognize the chairwoman of the Full Education and the Workforce Committee, Dr. Virginia Fox.
Thank you, Chairman Kiley, and thanks to our witnesses for being here today. Mr. Rienzi, UCLA has been a hotbed of pervasive anti-Semitism. When UCLA Chancellor Gene Block testified before this committee on May 23, I asked him how many students have been expelled or suspended for anti-Semitic conduct and how many staff have been disciplined. He responded that there are more than 100 active investigations, but he did not say that any student has been expelled or suspended or that any staff has been disciplined. Could you discuss the lawsuit Becket has filed on behalf of Jewish UCLA students against the university and whether UCLA failed to take appropriate action to protect these students' rights?
Certainly, Chairwoman Fox. The lawsuit we filed was on behalf of 3 students at the University of California, Los Angeles, 2 law students and 1 undergraduate student. Each of them endured vile anti-Semitism while at UCLA, and each was excluded from passing through central parts of campus due to the encampment that was there. These are students who are tuition-paying students. They have every right to be on the campus as much as anybody of any other religion or any other national origin, but they weren't able to do it because UCLA allowed the encampment to be set up. I should point out that the encampment was a violation of UCLA's own policies that they allowed. UCLA is a public institution and does allow First Amendment speech and protest, but it doesn't allow the taking over of parts of campus. It doesn't allow blocking other people from going about their business. But UCLA knew that was going on. It ordered its police not to intervene. It hired extra security to send the Jewish kids around. And so our students have been deprived of their ability to access the campus. And I should say, I wish it stopped a month ago, but it hasn't. As recently as June 10th, UCLA acknowledged that they had another encampment that stopped students from accessing campus and getting to exams.
Professor Keating, your written testimony notes that every May at UCSD for many years, Students for Justice in Palestine have led a week of anti-Israel activities called Justice in Palestine Week, which is informally known as Israel Apartheid Week. How many years has this annual event taken place, and what kinds of activities does it entail?
Thank you, Dr. Fox. The annual event, which informally by students at least is called Israel Hate Week, takes place during Israel Independence Day and the Holocaust Remembrance Day. It's time to do that. And typically what's found there are huge billboards taking over the entire common area leading up to the student library. Sometimes that includes checkpoints where there will be mock Israeli defense uniforms being worn by some of the Students for Justice in Palestine and other folks, people wearing full head coverings, masks, etc., chanting slogans, depicting the state of Israel completely eliminated from the map of the Middle East, replaced by a Palestinian flag. There are oftentimes events co-held on campus at the exact same time, bringing in outside speakers. That are then timed to act as sort of a bulwark against students or faculty members that wish to counter the examples that are presented, extremely biased narrative of the events of the Middle East. And it becomes a very intimidating, intolerable location at the center of our campus student union for most students to walk by for an entire week on campus.
Thank you very much. Professor Golden, you have talked about your experiences at Mount San Antonio College, and you've told us that your planning to leave academia when you can. Could you discuss whether you would prefer to remain at your college and continue teaching if you were not subject to anti-Semitic environment?
Of course, I would prefer for the administration to address the anti-Semitism. I love my job, but this toxic environment feels like a deliberate attempt to force me out, pushing me to consider moving to Israel, where I can live and work as a Jew without persecution. Teaching geography has been my life's work, but this situation harms not only me, but my students. My classes are being politicized and boycotted, making it impossible for me to teach effectively.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And again, thanks to our witnesses. I yield back.
Pursuant to the previous order, the chair declares the subcommittee in recess, subject to the call of the chair for votes on the House floor. We will reconvene immediately following the last vote of the series. It looks like it's a short vote series, so we should be back pretty soon. Thank you. The subcommittee stands in recess. The subcommittee will reconvene and come to order. I now recognize the ranking member for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and again, thank you to the witnesses. I certainly am interested in what we're talking about today. I am a retired 40-year college professor and administrator, so I certainly appreciate what you do, and I have been a part of that. So, Ms. Emrey-Arras, if an employee believes that their employer has engaged in discrimination or other unlawful acts against them in violation of Title VII, there are several potential legal claims that they must pursue. What are the most common types of alleged discriminatory practices that GAO found when it analyzed employment discrimination complaints against colleges and universities under Act 7 of the Civil Rights Act?
Thank you so much for that question. In our analysis of EEOC discrimination complaint data, this is for all types of cases, we found that losing one's job was a significant issue in many of the complaints, as was the terms and conditions of employment, which could involve being in a discriminatory work environment. We also found issues of harassment, discipline, and wages were common complaints as part of the EEOC complaint data.
Thank you. So based on GAO's analysis of EEOC data, how does the frequency of religious discrimination charges against higher education institutions compare to other types of discrimination charges?
While there were quite a few complaints regarding religious issues, in fact, as I mentioned, over 1,000 charges related to religious discrimination, those were a smaller portion of the complaints compared to other categories. For example, there were close to 7,000 charges related to racial discrimination, and similarly close to 7,000 related to discrimination based on sex.
Okay, thank you. So even if an academic institution hires from a diverse applicant pool, retention is just as important in maintaining a diverse workforce. Discrimination may continue to contribute to a professor's decision to leave a position, and we've heard some of that. But based on your review of the issue of faculty diversity and employment discrimination in higher ed, can you talk a little bit about how discrimination and other factors may contribute to a faculty member's decision to leave their position?
I think there are certain issues that we found based on our work that could contribute, and you sort of see this in the flip side of what colleges are trying to do to stem the tide on that front and to maintain retention of diverse faculty. Mentoring has been key, according to the colleges that we've interviewed. They think it's important that faculty have early mentoring, that they get mentoring later on for key career stages. It's also helpful for faculty to have a strong work-life balance and to feel supported at their colleges.
Okay, so are there metrics on record that speak to how something like a person's given name can play a part on whether they're discriminated against or not when they're seeking employment?
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question?
Well, would a person's name, given name, or any other factors play a part whether they're discriminated against?
In terms of our work, we found that it's important to have a diverse hiring pool as part of a search committee to help address any potential bias in a selection process, which could relate to bias based on someone's name and ethnicity.
Okay. So GAO's report highlighted untimely referrals of complaints alleging employment discrimination at institutions and so forth. So how might the delays in referrals to EEOC impact individual complaints and EEOC's work to address employment discrimination at institutions of higher ed?
The delays would affect things on several levels. On one level, complaints are being investigated just frankly later, so the case would be less fresh for EEOC to investigate. In addition, individuals who are experiencing discrimination could continue to experience discrimination during those delays. That could mean that they could continue to be working in a hostile work environment. They could continue to go without pay from promotions or from positions and suffer financially during that period.
Yes, you know, the information that I have indicate that the delays have only increased in the last 10 years, with 73% of referrals from OCR to EEOC. But I just want to add that we know that you've taken a 25% cut, and those things impact. And Mr. Chairman, I'd like to enter into the record 2 articles, one from the Jewish Insider and a letter from 91 civil rights groups.
Without objection.
And with that, Mr. Chair, I yield back.
The representative from New York, Ms. Stefanik, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Kiley. Professor Golden, thank you for being here today. You describe in your written testimony the anti-Semitic harassment that a professor and students have directed towards you and how it has caused you to want to leave academia. Could you describe the overall atmosphere that Jewish faculty and Jewish students are facing at your college, and specifically, what was the college administration's response to those anti-Semitic incidents directed specifically to you?
Thank you. The administration has chosen the path of least resistance, doing the bare minimum to appear to take anti-Semitism seriously. They've refused to adopt the widely accepted IRA definition of anti-Semitism, which could help them better identify and address these incidents. While I commend them for not capitulating to divestment demands, their overall response has been mostly lip service.
Professor Keating, I understand that UCSD had its own anti-Semitic encampment on campus for 5 days before it was dispersed by the police. It is reported that 64 individuals were arrested, 40 of whom were students. Could you describe this encampment and the anti-Semitic statements made by protesters there?
Yes, thank you, Congresswoman. The encampment sprung up over a course of over a period of 5 days. It tripled in size in just a few days. The protesters were allowed to have their freedom of speech, their First Amendment rights recognized. In fact, there have been 2,500 attendees to pro-Palestinian / anti-Israel protests on our campus alone, which have been majority peaceful. But this one was different. This one resulted in continued refusal to allow inspections by campus fire marshals. There were weapons found there, including a 3-foot-long ninja sword that I displayed during my testimony. There were flammable materials found there. They would not let in inspectors. They would also not let in Jews or anybody identifying as a Jew wearing, for example, a Star of David or a high symbol, anything of that nature. And it was incredibly intimidating. There were chants there of globalizing the Intifada. There were leaflets passed out by the Revolutionary Socialist of America that said that freedom for Palestine means death to America, as I displayed in my oral testimony as well. So this was an incredibly hostile environment, not just for Jews, but for Americans and students who wanted to just have a peaceful day to go about their lives on campus and study or their employment.
I also want to ask you about policy changes that would address the rise of anti-Semitism on campuses across the country. Would banning the wearing of masks so that individuals at encampments can be identified help in this regard? And what other policy changes would help protect Jewish faculty and students?
I think so. I think banning masks is one step to doing so. I think it's appropriate to wear religious garb, of course, but to completely cover your face, there's absolutely no need to do that unless you're involved in some activity that you're either ashamed of or do not want to participate in. And so wearing masks and wearing full headgear and covering up your entire human personhood is demeaning, and it creates a barrier. Also, I should note that in the Students for Justice in Palestine Constitution, they adopt a strict policy of not negotiating with anyone who supports the state of Israel as a sovereign nation. They refuse to negotiate or dialogue with quote-unquote Zionists. This organization currently is operating under a cease and desist order on campus. It didn't prevent them from organizing a complicity walking tour where they targeted individual professors by name due to their national origin or the fact that they were Jewish, and doing research on studying, say, the biblical flood story. And it had nothing to do with politics, just because they happened to be Jewish and or conducting research in Israel. And the most reprehensible thing to me as a faculty member, it's fine for students to exercise their rights. We all should do that. It's part of our constitutionally granted rights. But for faculty to take a paycheck from a university that they claim is committing acts of genocide, is complicit in genocide, and to continue working there and encourage students to get arrested and call students themselves complicit in the genocide themselves. And when students expressed their fear to the academic senate chair, John Hildebrand, he ignored them, the Jewish students, and other people on an open call compared Jewish students fearing for their safety. He compared them to students during the segregation period who supported the KKK. This is unacceptable in a place of learning, in my opinion.
Thank you for your bravery being here today. Thank you for standing up what is morally right, standing up for Jewish students, Jewish faculty, Jews around the world. And with that, I yield back.
The representative from California, Mr. Takano, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the witnesses for being here today. Anti-Semitism on college campuses is a serious issue, and I denounce and deplore anti-Semitism. Racism is also an issue, and I deplore it, as well as Islamophobia, sex discrimination, homophobia, and all forms of bigotry that create barriers to faculty being able to work and students being able to learn. And I fully support providing all resources necessary to the institutions in our government tasked with enforcing anti-discrimination law, namely the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, or EEOC, and the Department of Education Office for Civil Rights, otherwise known as OCR. These entities seek to ensure a crucial balance between academic freedom and safety and security for all who work, study, and live on college campuses. My first question to Ms. Emrey-Arras, can you describe how EEOC handles a complaint once it is filed?
Once it is filed, it is provided to investigators who then examine the complaint to see if it has all the necessary pieces to it, and then they often work towards some kind of settlement with a college to see if that is possible to obtain. If they are unable to do a settlement, they could potentially pursue litigation or a referral for litigation.
Is there a general amount of time it takes for a claim to get resolved and disposed of?
I wouldn't be able to speak to that for this particular issue. We haven't looked at the number of days for these claims.
Okay. In GAO's full March 2024 report, OCR indicated that reduced staffing levels and rising complaints have had a significant impact on making timely referrals of discrimination complaints to EEOC. What relationship does funding and staffing of the OCR have to their expediency or efficiency in processing complaints?
Thank you for that. We did hear that OCR has resource constraints, which limits their ability to focus on this issue. They specifically mentioned the rise in the number of complaints, significant rise in number of complaints over time, while also experiencing declines in the number of investigators available to look at those complaints. So we do recognize that in our work. At the same time, we would very much like to make sure that referrals are timely so that people who have experienced discrimination can obtain relief. And we believe that the Department of Education can do more to help ensure timely referrals.
Well, that's fair enough, but there is, the resource constraint has had an impact on the timely referral of complaints. Does the March 2024 report take into account the recent surge of complaints to OCR after the October 7th attack?
It does not. It covers an earlier time period, sir.
So in fact, the October 7th attack impact and the surge of complaints could have worsened the ability for referrals to be done in a timely way.
That is correct.
So I fail to see how we continue to if we continue to flat fund OCR and make progress in addressing these discrimination issues, how is it that we could the recommendations that the GAO laid out in your 2024 report be aided by Congress? Well,
we think it's important for Congress to highlight these issues. We're grateful that you're having this hearing today to focus on this important issue, and we think anything that the Congress can do to hold education and EEOC's feet to the fire to implement our recommendations would be greatly appreciated.
Well, the EEOC reported year after year increases in discrimination complaints across several sectors while facing flat funding. The latest Republican-crafted appropriations bill released earlier this week slashes the EEOC's budget by 8%, which is over $68 million less than what was put forth in the administration 2025 proposal. It also flat funded OCR for fiscal year 25, which would result in flat funding for the agency for the third fiscal year in a row. Mr. Rienzi, your testimony suggests that EOC could or should single out claims of anti-Semitism for enforcement. At the same time, Republicans are proposing to cut funding for EEOC by $35 million and flat fund OCR for the third year. How do you reconcile your goals and also the ability to advance the agency's work to combat discrimination?
I'm not familiar with the EEOC's funding levels either before or after or the impact of those funding levels, but I certainly support EEOC doing its job of pursuing these claims.
Well, I wish I had more time, but I need to yield back, and thank you for your testimony.
The representative from Missouri, Mr. Burleson, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Professor Keating, I understand that the local United Auto Workers chapter of the UAW 4811 voted to strike in protest that your university and the police removed the anti-Semitic, anti-Israel protesters and their encampment. The UAW alleged that workers' rights were violated in their handling of the anti-Israel protests, and the individuals were even though these individuals were violating policies, the union is demanding amnesty for the employees and students to basically fight for their right to be anti-Semitic, I guess. Professor Keating, are you aware of the UAW strike on the campus?
Yes, sir, I am aware of it. In fact, our teaching assistants in my classes, and I've taught thousands of students over the years, they are effectively forced to be members of the United Auto Workers Union as part of their contract and their collective bargaining agreement.
So even though it's a university, they're forced. Is it a public university, or are they?
Yes, it's a public university.
So is this a government system, and yet people are being compelled to be a member?
I believe that, I can't speak if they're literally forced to do it. I know that you have to resign, and in fact, many of the graduate student teaching assistants submitted their testimonials to me. In fact, had to meet with their unit representative in order to resign from the union actively based on their partisan advocacy for in support of the anti-Israel demonstrators receiving full rights. Again, why they want to receive full rights to a diploma from a university that they claim is genocidal, complicit, et cetera, and hold constant boycotts against is beyond me. However, I should point out that none of the students that I teach, which I remind you are physics students, astronomy students, et cetera, including devout Muslims who work with me and for me, and I've always had a proud tradition of educating people from around the world, they refused to strike, and in fact, they told me, we stand with Israel. And for them to have to proactively tell me that, because otherwise I might have had to take over all their responsibilities. And there's a faculty organization which is not officially sanctioned by the university. They call themselves the San Diego Faculty Association, that again was encouraging protest, encouraging walkouts, encouraging the graduate students who are employees. And in fact, one employee of the union, a teaching assistant, broadcast to his undergraduate students that they have a right, a moral obligation to protest the university's complicit nature with the activities of Israel in Gaza and beyond. So he was using an intimidation tactic on the students whose grades he's partially responsible for to advocate for political speech. That's appalling. So what were the policies of the university that they were violating on campus? Because if pro-Israeli students were protesting and violating these policies, one might expect there to be equal treatment. What were the policies that were being violated? So these were encouragement to cease work. They were operating. The graduate students did go on strike 2 years ago to advocate for higher wages, and as you know, living in La Jolla is not an inexpensive endeavor. So I support their right to advocate for. Right. So this was an unauthorized strike in the sense that they weren't authorized by their own union rules to go on strike for political purposes. They can go on strike for whatever reason. So did they violated a labor practice? That was the consent. I have to defer to legal experts, but I believe that was the decision. In fact, California state courts ruled that strike was no longer supported, was in violation of the union's contract. So they did go back to work eventually. Do you think most members of the UAW understand that there's a segment of their labor union that is actively making sure that people have a right to be anti-Semitic? I think they claim to represent 58,000 members of the University of California. As Congressman Kiley said, it's an enormous employer in the state of California. That's not an insignificant fraction of the employment of the state of California, and yet I don't believe they represent more than a few percent. Well, and what I find striking is that, they're supposed to represent all workers' rights, and yet did you see any activity that they were expressing that indicated that they cared about the Jewish students and workers? No, in fact, one graduate student teaching employee, she stated that she met with the union organizing unit unit chair, and they said that we sometimes advocate for political reasons. Thank you. My time has expired.
The representative from North Carolina, Ms. Manning, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. I have found the failure of our universities to protect Jewish students and faculty members from discrimination and harassment since October 7th to be enormously concerning, disappointing, and problematic for the future of our democracy. And your testimony has given us concrete examples of this failure and the impact on real people. Other examples of the examples that you have stated of the kinds of harassment you have experienced is simply unacceptable, and we cannot allow the continued normalization of anti-Semitism on campuses and in the workplace. And sadly, we've learned that anti-Semitism in the workplace has become more open and pervasive. A recent study published in the academic journal Associates found that more than half of Jewish respondents experienced discrimination at work, and another survey found that 25% of hiring managers are less likely to advance Jewish candidates. So this issue goes beyond the college campus, and it is critical that employees understand how to file complaints, and that the EEOC have the resources they need to resolve these complaints in a timely and effective manner. Professor Golden, I want to start by thanking you for sharing your heartbreaking story. Your account was incredibly painful to hear, and I'm sure it must have been much more painful to live through. You filed a discrimination complaint initially with Mount San Antonio College, is that correct?
Yes, it is.
And when you started working there, were you ever told that you could file a discrimination complaint with the EEOC?
I don't remember exactly. I may have been informed that there were outside processes, but I don't think that the specific organization
Okay,
was
and
discussed.
were you aware of the differences between filing with the OCR, the Office of Civil Rights, and filing with the EEOC?
Definitely not. That was not clarified.
And Professor Keating, thank you for sharing your story as well. Also, so disturbing. And I want to ask you the same question. Were you ever told about the option or your ability to file an EEOC complaint on the basis of religious discrimination?
No, ma'am, I was not.
And were you aware of the differences between filing with the Office of Civil Rights and filing with the EEOC?
I was not. I have since familiarized myself with that policy.
I think this reflects an issue similar to the one that we've seen with students who faced anti-Semitic discrimination, many of whom did not know that they could file an OCR complaint. And clearly, we have an awareness problem. And I know that the OCR has attempted to put into place an awareness campaign. And Ms. Emrey-Arras, are you aware that any such campaign, awareness campaign, has been put into effect by the EEOC?
We know that EEOC has done educational efforts to help employers, including institutions, learn about their services. And we think this issue of underreporting is a central one. Although we did not focus specifically on that in this employment discrimination work, in past work we've looked at hate crimes on college campuses, and in that work we found that underreporting was a significant issue. And according to the Department of Justice, with hate crimes, they expected that about half of hate crimes were not being reported.
Thank you. And in your written testimony, you noted that there are cases where faculty file with OCR, and those cases then have to be turned over to the EEOC. Is that correct?
Yes.
And many of those cases were not referred within the 30 days required by federal law. Is that also correct?
Required by policy, correct.
By policy, thank you. And was this in part due to lack of resources at both OCR and the EEOC?
We did hear from OCR that they were concerned about resources and that was a factor on their end.
And we know that there has been a dramatic increase in the number of cases filed at OCR. Is that correct?
That is correct. They have also experienced a significant decline in investigative staff during the same time period.
Would you say that increasing federal funding to OCR and EEOC and expanding their staffing capacities and their staff training could help with the potential correction to this problem?
Although I wouldn't be able to comment on budgetary issues, I do think that it's important that both OCR and EEOC implement our recommendations, and we think that they have the technology to do so.
It seems clear that there are several key problems here. Faculty don't always know what to do when they face discrimination. They don't know whether to file with OCR or the EEOC. If they file at OCR and it doesn't have the capacity to send their cases to the EEOC on a timely basis, those cases may fall through the cracks. So clearly, I'd like to close by saying we need to fund the OCR and the EEOC, as my colleagues and I have been demanding for months. And I will close by, again, calling for the majority to increase rather than cut these agencies' budgets if they really want to do better by Jewish students and faculty. And I yield back.
The representative from Wisconsin, Mr. Grothman, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. First of all, I'll start with Mr. Keating. I'm a little bit surprised here to say that apparently the local UAW union decided to weigh in when California San Diego students were asked to disperse. Could you elaborate on that? It's a little surprised that the union would try to put all their prestige on the line here.
Yeah, it wasn't only the University of California, San Diego, Congressman. It was all university campuses within our university system. So multiple campuses. They organized rolling strikes. They called them Day of Action or complicity tours, where they would organize shutdowns of campus or attempt to shut down campus. But the students, again, are the lifeblood of the university, and every educator has to recognize that. So they're not only our students, but they're employees of the University of California as well. We pay their salaries through research grants, some of them federal grants that come from the National Science Foundation, Department of Energy, et cetera. And their representative union that they have been under representation by is known as the United Auto Workers Union.
Well, sometimes the unions wind up getting involved with things that are none of their business, if that leadership is kind of involved in that. There is apparently an exhibit in the college's library, kind of a non-controversial thing, showing the lines on a map, Israel, West Bank, apparently over a period of time, and that was removed. Do you have any comments as to what UCLA was thinking of there?
I believe that was Professor Golden's testimony.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, I did. I should have talked to you. What was going on with the university there?
I had obtained verbal approval from a librarian to develop an educational exhibit on Israel's changing borders, created for Geography Awareness Week. It was removed because what they called procedural oversight. However, the library later claimed that it was taken down because of student complaints and alleged division it caused.
Well, complaint. Isn't that too bad? So somebody didn't like an impartial analysis of the situation, and all of a sudden your First Amendment is out the door.
The display included a book promoting coexistence and reconciliation, and included both Palestinian and Israeli flags. The implication that simply showcasing Israel's history and geography is divisive suggests that the college may inadvertently be endorsing the idea that Israel's very existence is offensive. As an academic institution, they should be upholding the principles of academic freedom and allow for the presentation of factual educational content, even if it faces objections. The removal of my display not only undermines these principles, but sends a chilling message that certain topics are off limits, stifling open dialogue.
Well, we're getting more into the attack on the First Amendment, which I think is becoming, sadly, a little more par for the course for too many universities. Now, I'd have to say that if this intolerance was going to spring up in any area of society, I guess it doesn't surprise me it would spring up at America's universities. And I'm looking here of a study that was done by a variety of professors. I know one was from George Mason a few years back, but nevertheless, they collected ideological data of various different professors in different disciplines at 7 campuses. And, you know, when they're in some states, people have to identify as Republican, Democrat. English literature departments, for every person who identified Republican, 35 identified as Democrat. Performing arts, for every person who identified Republican, 31 identified as Democrat. History, for every person who identified as Republican, 16 voted Democrat, or identified as Democrat. And sociology, we can't say a ratio because nobody identified as Republican, everybody identified as Democrat. I think when you have such a ideological monolith, it's just a recipe for horrible ideas to bubble to the top. Could any of you comment on what effect it has in general on a campus where it appears like they must almost be actively discouraging people who are outside the left wing to be employed at a campus?
Well, DEI policies are rigidly enforced for other groups, but the atmosphere for Jewish faculty and students, especially since October 7th, has been one of hostility and silencing.
On my campus, some of the most unifying moments I've had between my liberal, Democrat, and conservative Republican friends, as in the sciences, there, as you probably noted, there are more Republicans, but the notion has never been, we've never been closer. That said, there are a great many professors that are identify themselves as liberal and Jewish, and they actually compared my chancellor to the biblical genocidal maniac known as Pharaoh, when he decided to disperse the campus violence that took place in early May of 2024.
Okay, but you don't see a correlation between the apparent really dislike of Republicans that preceded this anti-Semitism and the intolerance you're seeing now?
I mean, there's not an ideological litmus test that's applied. I think people feel more comfortable speaking out. I have colleagues in literature. I've co-taught classes in literature, as you noted. Very, very much unified politically on the Democratic side. People of intellectual stature can get along. That's one of the hallmarks of academia. Should be tolerance. Unfortunately, it's not so common these days.
Well, thank you.
The gentlewoman from Illinois, Ms. Miller, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Kiley, and thank you to our witnesses for being here today. Professor Golden, your written testimony indicates that a campaign of anti-Semitic harassment against you resulted in the cancellation of your spring in-person class. How has anti-Semitic harassment and a hostile work environment affected your career?
The anti-Semitic harassment has had a profound impact on my career. I went from being deeply engaged and enthusiastic to feeling alienated and counting the days until retirement. While it feels unbearable to continue teaching at Mount SAC, the experiences of other Jewish professors I've connected with suggest that this is a widespread issue. If this pervasive campus anti-Semitism isn't addressed by administrators nationwide, we risk losing talented and brilliant educators from our colleges and universities.
It's really a shame, but I do want to thank you for coming forward and giving your testimony. And I would like to say this is all a clear violation of Title VII. Very sad to see. And I yield back the remainder of my time to Chairman Kiley.
Thank you very much. Professor Keating, one of the sort of perverse ironies that we have seen in this rise of anti-Semitism on campus is that many of the universities that have been the worst offenders in terms of suppressing free speech and violating the First Amendment on campus are now suddenly claiming the mantle of the First Amendment as a reason to allow what is actually anti-Semitic conduct that is not indeed protected under the First Amendment. Could you give us a little bit of sense of how that double standard or sort of backward state of affairs has played out on your campus?
Yeah, it seems to me that freedom of speech is never applied so liberally as it is when it comes to demonizing Jews and anti-Semitic voices on campuses. And unfortunately, this is probably within the purview. We asked and we heard from the other witnesses today about policies, the EOC, and so forth that could be used. But all campuses currently already have principles of community that forbid harassment, discrimination based on any other identifying trait, whether it's religion, national origin, gender status, et cetera, these would be forbidden, and they are. And in fact, as I testified, when there was, long before October 7th, this Justice in Palestine Week has been taking place, it becomes a terrifying place for a young Israeli-American student who's just trying to become a pre-med so she can treat people and help save lives. There is an environment on campus which is almost orgiastic of violence, of hatred towards Jewish people and towards the state of Israel that she has to endure, that others have to endure. And it's well within the purview, in my opinion, I'm not a lawyer, but the opinion that I hold is that it's our principles of community that are continually being violated, including wearing complete head coverings, head-to-toe masks, and chants for the destruction and violence against people based on their national origin.
Thank you. And Mr. Rienzi, one of the really disturbing things that we have seen is at some universities, the response to these illegal encampments has been to surrender to them and to accede to the demands of those in the encampments and to sort of institutionalize the anti-Semitic character of them by incorporating it into university policy. You gave us a number of different legal tools that are available for universities and that we as the House might look to. Do you see how any of them might apply to that sort of situation?
Yes. So where the universities fail to stop and actively facilitate this type of discrimination, they are in violation of many federal laws. They're violating Title VI, they're violating the Ku Klux Klan Act, they're violating the constitutional rights of the Jewish students who have a right to exercise their religion, to appear as Jews, to consider themselves part of a Jewish homeland in Israel, and the universities are failing to enforce their laws and are failing to protect the rights of those students. And I'll just say, at UCLA, for example, they have policies that make it, they are in favor of free speech. They're in favor of free speech, but they say speech must not interfere with the orderly operation of campus, must be conducted in a manner that reasonably protects others, must not block entrances to or otherwise interfere with the free flow of traffic, cannot knowingly and willingly interfere with others. So the schools know that this is not First Amendment protected behavior that's going on here, yet the schools are facilitating it by aiding with the barricades and sending the Jewish students away. And that's just a clear constitutional and federal civil rights violation.
Thank you very much. The representative from Michigan, Mr. Wahlberg, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks for letting me wave on to this important subcommittee hearing. And thank you to the panelists for being here. Following the October 7th attack on Israel, we've seen a disgusting rise in anti-Semitic harassment of Jewish students and staff at our so-called elite universities, which should be places where free speech, freedom of religion, and truth prevail. On March 1st, at the University of Virginia Board of Visitors member Bert Ellis attempted to discuss the outbreak of anti-Semitism on campus and across the country, the broader BDS movement, and the need to discuss the harassment of Jewish students. Unfortunately, Mr. Ellis was not permitted to discuss this issue in a public session and was told he would be reprimanded if he pursued the issue by Rector Hardy. Threatening to punish a board member for wanting to discuss the rampant harassment and violence being directed at Jewish students is unacceptable. The university is also facing a lawsuit from a Jewish student who alleges he was assaulted because he's Jewish. The lawsuit also notes professors would offer students extra credit for attending anti-Semitic rallies. Mr. Rienzi, you detailed in your written testimony the anti-Semitism UCLA faculty have faced. In your expertise, would retaliating against a faculty or board member, such as the incidents at the University of Virginia, potentially constitute a Title VII violation?
Yes, so I'm not familiar with the facts of the University of Virginia case, but as you describe it, both Title VII and the First Amendment have been enforced by the federal courts to not only, so let's start with Title VII, to not only protect people from illegal discrimination in their employment, but to also protect people from retaliation for pointing out Title VII violations. So both under Title VII and under the First Amendment, I would think you could have a retaliation claim if someone is punished or restricted for pointing out those violations. And may I just say, again, I don't know the facts of Virginia, but I do think it's incumbent on people who hold jobs like board members of these prominent universities. They have obligations to run the university in a lawful way, particularly at a public university. And so it seems to me it's entirely consistent with their obligations to look into these things.
Yeah, you would think. Mr. Rienzi, UCLA is only one among dozens, if not hundreds, of colleges and their campuses that have been host to anti-Semitic protests since the October 7th Hamas attack on Israel. What responsibilities do colleges and universities have toward Jewish faculty and staff under Title VII of the Civil Rights Act?
So all employers with more than 15 employees, so the colleges and universities, but many, many other employers in the country too, have obligations under Title VII not to discriminate against their employees and not to allow their employees to have to suffer through a hostile work environment for their religion, religious exercise, national origin, and so forth. And so I think it's true of the stories we've heard today. I think it's true for faculty and staff at UCLA, and I'm sure it's true for faculty and staff at many other places, that their employers are failing. They are violating federal civil rights law when they allow the Jewish employees to have to endure day after day going to a workplace where people are saying death to the Jews, death to Israel, beat that effing Jew, which was a common refrain on UCLA's campus. Employers should not allow that to continue. They have an affirmative obligation to not have their employees thrust into a hostile work environment.
Seems very clear. Thank you. Professor Golden, your written testimony describes anti-Semitic harassment directed toward you and your college administration's lack of response to this harassment. In your opinion, is your college even-handed when it comes to how it treats different groups and different kinds of speech and behavior?
The administration's response to harassment has been far from even-handed. They've silenced and isolated me, the victim, while seemingly appeasing those who created and foster a hostile environment. It appears they prioritize avoiding campus unrest over protecting Jewish students and faculty. For example, after the tragic events of October 7th, it took significant urging before the president of Mount SAC issued a weak statement that failed to even mention Jews. This lack of direct acknowledgement undermines the severity of the issue and the specific impact that it has on the Jewish community. By silencing pro-Israel voices and removing educational exhibits about Israel, the administration inadvertently emboldens those who promote hate and incite violence. This creates a chilling effect on campus, making Jewish students and faculty feel unsafe and unwelcome.
Thank you. Equal justice for all has been missed there. I yield back.
The representative of the ranking member of the full committee, Representative Scott, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Ms. Emrey-Arras, we mentioned the backlog several times. And you mentioned the mix of cases. Can you remind us what the top 3 categories of cases in the backlog of OCR cases is?
Happy to share with you our data. We looked at EEOC charges alleged against higher education institutions from 2011 to 2021. And so these were cases that EEOC received. And we found that the top 3 categories included charges related to race. That was the top category. The second was related to sex. And the third was related to disability.
Okay, and you had religion and national origin as 4th and 5th?
Correct.
5th and 6th?
Correct. So we had after disability, we have national origin, and then religion, and the color following that.
And within national origin and religion, are there things other than anti-Semitism that could have been involved in those?
Yes, sir.
Like what?
There could be other faiths considered in addition to Jewish religious discrimination complaints. There could be complaints against individuals of Muslim faith, Christian faith, and the like, for example.
Now, you mentioned it takes a long time to refer these cases to the EEOC. Why does it take so long?
Quite frankly, education isn't tracking it. They're not keeping an eye on how long it's taking them, and if they don't know how long it's taking, they can't manage it. They do have the ability to do that.
Are you suggesting that if they did a quick review, they could do this much more quickly?
We know that a little over 25% of the cases are being referred on time, and we think that if they did a review to figure out what was helping those cases go on time, they could use those lessons learned to help the others.
Now, is the insufficiency of the OCR budget a factor?
That was something that we did hear from education.
And that's what they said? Do you think it's a factor?
We do think it's a factor. They did raise the concern around the increased number of complaints and the decrease in investigative staff.
Thank you. Mr. Rienzi, in the 1960s, there was a pretty solid policy that if an institution or an organization received federal money, that they could not discriminate based on race, color, creed, or national origin. Is that still the case?
Yes, I believe you're referring to Title VI of the Civil Rights Act, and that remains the case.
So if a religious organization received federal money, they could not discriminate based on religion?
No, I think they can discriminate based on religion.
After they've taken federal money?
I don't believe there's anything in Title VI that restricts religious universities from discriminating based on religion. I may be misunderstanding your question.
Okay, well, in the 1960s, it didn't care who you were. If you took federal money, you couldn't discriminate. And now you're saying that if you're a religious organization taking federal money, you can, in fact, discriminate. Is that right?
Again, you're asking me about Title VI?
I'm talking about if you're a South Carolina foster care agency taking federal money and you restrict the placement just to Christian families?
Yes, I think the court resolved that case and said that under federal law it was permissible for that agency to operate as a religious nonprofit. And I believe they cited the Supreme Court's 9-0 Fulton decision in support of that.
So now so they can have a policy that we will not place children with Jewish families.
I don't know if the agency in question had that policy, but I do know that the court in South Carolina said that they are allowed to remain a religious institution.
What about employment?
I think Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, enacted by this Congress, says that religious institutions are allowed to consider religion in their hiring, and I think the First Amendment does that as well.
So if the South Carolina agency is a religious institution taking federal money, they can have an articulated policy, we don't hire Jews.
I think any religious institution under Title VII is allowed to engage in what you might call religious discrimination, whether it's a Jewish institution that wouldn't hire me or another.
Is that something we need to fix? As a condition of federal money, you shouldn't be able to discriminate?
No, I think under the Free Exercise Clause and under federal law, religious institutions are both permitted to participate in helping solve social problems without having to give up their free exercise rights.
Well, yeah, but that's with federal money.
Yes, the Supreme Court decided the Fulton case 9-0 with all of the justices.
I'm not talking about whether it's legal or not. I'm saying whether we ought to fix it.
No, I think it's legal and it should be left where it is because the court has correctly recognized that those institutions are permitted to do it.
I now recognize myself for 5 minutes. Professor Keating, I have a letter here from the president of the University of California System, Michael Drake. I had written him about my concerns about some of the things going on in campuses within the system, and he wrote me a letter back, which I appreciate. But this is the chief executive of the entire UC system, which includes your campus and 10 others. It's an organization that includes 200,000 some employees as well as all the students. And one of the things he says in the letter is that the University of California has consistently opposed calls for boycott against and divestment from Israel. While the university affirms the right of our community members to express diverse viewpoints, a boycott of this sort impinges on the academic freedom of our students and faculty and the unfettered exchange of ideas on our campuses, which is good. I'm glad he said that. It's the right policy, of course. It's actually, the law in California. But how has the BDS movement, how active has it been on your campus, and what role have has the faculty played, or some faculty members, in supporting it?
Yeah, unfortunately it's been incredibly active, and they do tend to exercise, as I said, every year at the coincident with Israel's Independence Day and with Holocaust Remembrance Day, this Justice in Palestine Week, which many students have told me they call Israel Apartheid Week or Hate Israel Week. It's an event that just last year, May 2023, 7 months before the October 7th terrorist attacks, found on a campus dorm a swastika made of human feces where Jews live and work. It's a combined use facility. At that time, there were also events at our sister campus, University of California, Santa Cruz, which are both anti-Semitic and homophobic. Again, we hear words from Dr. Drake about how we take this seriously, and there'll be panels. This is over a year. To my knowledge, no substantive changes have taken place. Is it a coincidence that it takes place, coincident with this event that's held annually? I can't say for sure, but it certainly predates October 7th. And so after October 7th, he did commission a panel, which apparently has a budget of over $7 million, which had a combined mission to combat anti-Semitism and Islamophobia. So we haven't seen, at least at my campus, my personal eyewitness, I have not seen any repercussions from it. And in fact, as I mentioned, dialogue is often discouraged by people that support the academic and cultural boycott of the one single Jewish state.
Extremely troubling. You also mentioned earlier that the dean of the faculty refused to meet with Jewish students, even as he readily met with representatives of other groups. Can you tell us a little more about that?
Yes, sir. That was the chair of the academic senate, John Hildebrand, who is the responsibility for effectively running meetings and having panels brought in, but not to advocate political causes or things of that nature. He did knowingly meet with Students for Justice in Palestine before they were issued a cease and desist order for violation of campus policies. And he refused at 5 separate occasions that I've documented in my written testimony to meet with any Jewish students, citing lack of time, and he blew them off, in my opinion, referring them to lesser campus procedural violations, even though they're expressing their heartfelt pain and suffering emotionally, sometimes feeling physically threatened. And he is responsible, for faculty governance. We have a shared governance model in our campus, and he did refuse to meet with very many stakeholders, including Jewish professors such as myself and others, outside of very limited circumstances.
And this gentleman is still the chair of the academic senate?
He will be replaced in the upcoming academic year.
Okay. I want to ask a final question, and anyone on one of the witnesses can weigh in on this if you'd like, which is that let's imagine that when school resumes in most places in the fall, you see these unlawful encampments, which are still actually operating in some places, but on your campuses or in any particular campus, they come back in full force along the lines of what we saw at UCLA, we saw at UC San Diego, or at least they start to form. What action would you recommend that the leaders of those universities takes? We've seen a menu of options for how these things have been handled. Some have allowed them to grow and grow and grow until they become unmanageable. Some have given in to the demands of those leading the encampments. Others have simply enforced the law and campus policies in an even-handed manner and dealt with the issue in short order. So which of these options might you recommend to a university leader? And maybe we can start with you, Mr. Rienzi, and go down the panel for whoever would like to answer.
Yeah, happy to address it, and it's the right question because fall is coming soon and students need to be able to safely return to campus. I think what the universities really need to do is aggressively stop the encampments from starting. So somebody comes and sets up tents, the first move is you just remove the tents. You do not allow a group to take over a section of campus. You do not allow them to stay there and stop others from entering. I think the key aspect of the mistake at a lot of these schools has been to allow the problem to fester, allow it to grow, allow it to get reinforced. And when you do that to a group of people chanting death to Jews or beat that effing Jew, what inevitably happens is that the Jews get excluded from parts of campus, and the universities have an obligation to make sure that doesn't happen. And I'll just speak as to our lawsuit. Our clients are very concerned. They have to return to campus in just under 2 months from now, and UCLA still does not seem to be able to stop the encampment, or really to muster the will to do it, and they need to be told by a federal court or otherwise to do that.
Yeah, I asked the committee to consider, the following thought experiment, as we physicists are likely to do, which is, to imagine that on our campus we have access to reproductive rights for young women on campus. Imagine if there was an organization diametrically opposed to that, believe in strict right to life, and they set up an encampment, a no-go zone, where young women felt intimidated to exercise their privileges and rights on this campus. I think their ID cards would be taken away and shut down later that afternoon. I don't think there's ever, kind of the tolerance of these things. They allow themselves to fester, as Mr. Enzi said. And I think enforcing existing laws. We were asked about, do we need more funding for committees, and do you guys need to do, men and women, need to do more funding-wise? That may be true, but every university has principles of community. They are entitled to enforce those principles of community, and they have an obligation to do so equally, liberally, and equitably for their students to feel safe and their employees to operate effectively in the workforce.
Would you like to add to that? We're a little over time, but if you could briefly.
The administration should acknowledge and apply the IRA definition of anti-Semitism, and disseminating this definition would enhance awareness and understanding of what constitutes anti-Semitism, because I think a lot of students don't even recognize it when they see it. Additionally, the Human Resources Office should increase its efforts to advertise the reporting mechanisms for Title VI violations across campus, because again, I think a lot of students aren't even aware of when these violations are taking place. The DEI programming and initiatives should have orienting materials and written guidelines that explicitly include anti-Semitism based on the IRA definition. And finally, the administration must take a firm stance against the display of symbols of hate, such as swastikas and Hamas flags.
Thank you very much. I'll now recognize the ranking member for a closing statement.
Thank you, Chairman Kiley, and thank you again to our witnesses today for your testimony. Everyone deserves a workplace free from discrimination, even on college campuses and university campuses. The challenges raised today regarding addressing anti-Semitism and other forms of discrimination demand our urgent attention and immediate action. We must ensure that everyone's civil rights are protected and that all individuals, regardless of background, feel respected and valued in their educational and professional environments. Today's conversation reinforced my commitment to advancing inclusive policies that protect the rights and dignity of all individuals, especially students. It's also clear to me that a critical part of our response must be to fully resource our civil rights enforcement agencies, because they cannot do their jobs without this support. We cannot expect to make progress in addressing discrimination in our schools and workplaces by shortchanging the very agencies responsible for enforcing our civil rights laws. By strengthening the capacity of our enforcement agencies, enhancing diversity initiatives, fostering equitable treatment, I believe that we can create environments where every person can thrive. So I'm encouraged by today's deliberations, and I look forward to continuing this important work. Again, I want to thank my colleagues and thank our witnesses for your contributions today. And Mr. Chairman, I thank you and I yield back.
Thank you very much. I want to thank all of the witnesses for being here to testify and for your courage. I know that you are speaking for a great many of your colleagues as well as your students in relaying the experience that you've had and what you've been through these last several months and even before that. I also want to thank my colleagues and members of the committee on both sides of the aisle for participating today. I think it's clear there is a strong bipartisan commitment to assuring that the safety and civil rights of students and faculty alike are protected on our campuses. I particularly appreciate the comment from Congresswoman Manning that we cannot continue to allow the normalization of anti-Semitism at universities and in the workplace. And this committee will continue to do everything we can, use every tool available to assure that that does not happen. I want to close first by citing another excerpt from the letter that I received from the president of the UC system, Michael Drake. He said, "We readily accept our obligation to protect the rights and safety of our students, faculty, staff, and visitors to our campuses. We must exercise these rights and ensure safety within the broad confines of the law, as well as the policies we have established. Destructive actions that prevent members of the community from accessing public facilities or leaving campus in a safe and timely fashion are not protected actions, but illegal disruptions to the operations of our campuses and the mission of the university." So this committee, the full committee, has had the opportunity at this point to hear from a number of university presidents, and we have seen some real accountability. We've seen university leaders resign or be replaced. We've seen new initiatives on campus. We've seen reforms. We've seen encampments taken down. So there has been some progress, and the words we just that I just read from the president is absolutely the right position. But we have also seen that sometimes there's a disconnect between the words that we hear from these campus leaders and what's actually going on campus. And so I appreciate our witnesses shedding some light on that. And I can assure everyone watching that this committee is watching very closely what is happening on our university campuses and whether the law is being upheld there. And so I thought I would just close by reading a few more testimonials. This is just from one particular university, the University of San Diego. These are fully contained within the appendix to Professor Keating's testimony. But here's just a few more voices from that campus, which again is just a few voices from one particular campus in California. This is from Jubilee Cabalon, who is a PhD student researcher, says, I don't feel like I can be outwardly Jewish in my place of work and schooling, and I am scared of being targeted, and I'm scared of being confronted to choose or speak up. I ask myself, do I do what my ancestors did and hide my Judaism to survive? Or do I show myself a Jew without trembling knees? I don't feel safe on campus. I am constantly on the brink of a breakdown with fear of people asking, are you a good Jew or a bad Jew? This is from student employee Hayi Renanan Bachiri, who says, my inbox is full of emails from my department composed by faculty, administration, and graduate students that are steeped in blood libel and anti-Semitic rhetoric. I can't turn a corner on campus without coming face to face with a flyer promoting the destruction of Israel by any means necessary, posters and graffiti and pamphlets that repeat the phrase, from the river to the sea slogan calling for the deaths of my family and the annihilation of any Jews who dare live in our indigenous homeland. About 2 weeks ago, this testimonial continues, I walked out of the building in which I teach and was greeted by a sign reading one solution, Intifada Revolution. I was talking with a student at the time but completely froze and couldn't continue answering his question. I was too busy dealing with PTSD, something that's become a regular occurrence whenever I'm on campus, which is anywhere from 3 to 6 days a week. It goes on. I'm afraid to leave my apartment for fear of the outpouring of anti-Semitism that's flooded the campus, and also notes my department has become completely inhospitable with every meeting, event, and performance preceded by statements supporting the people calling for the murder of Jews. We have several more. I'll just close with Professor Jeff Bracewell, who says during a recent hiring process for an endowed chair in the archaeology of ancient Israel, professors labeled candidates as, quote, too Zionist or too religious, leading to hostile interviews and protests. A distinguished archaeologist faced harassment due to his religion and nationality, with protesters disrupting his presentation and spreading false claims about his work. This should never happen in the United States of America, least of all at our institutions of higher learning, which are so vital to the future of our country. Without objection, there being no further business, the subcommittee stands adjourned.